music bed.
Hey guys, my name is Melissa Velasquez and welcome to my Heartbeat Bill Act podcast. In today's podcast, we will be discussing what the Heartbeat Bill is and what views and stances our community has on this bill. We will also be looking at the advice and information that was given to us by our attorney interviewee. Why don't we start off by going more into depth on what the Heartbeat Bill is. This bill was signed into law by Texas Governor Abbott and it went into effect on September 1st of 2021. This law banned abortions after approximately 6 weeks of conception, meaning women only have those 6 weeks to get the abortion. Anyone who takes part in getting an abortion after the 6 weeks will be sued. Now, why don't we discuss why this is so controversial and why we feel there should be a discussion on this. A woman is unaware of pregnancy until after 6 weeks of conception, and studies have shown most women do not know they are pregnant until 7 to 12 weeks of conception. A 6-week gestation period is not a sufficient amount of time for women to be made aware of pregnancy. On January 22nd of 1973, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled out the passing of legislation of abortion as an unconstitutional right to protect women. This was made possible by the case of Roe v. Wade. 43 years later, and the state of Texas has unlawfully banned abortions after 6 weeks of conception. What does the new law do? The passage of the law prohibits women from getting an abortion after 6 weeks of conception. This has caused a controversial debate in our home state of Texas and throughout our country, leaving many questions. If a fetus is considered viable after conception, does the new passage of the law violate a woman's constitutional right to get an abortion? The purpose of the project is to help bring awareness to the controversial topic and explore the attitudes towards abortion and the passing of the Texas S.B. 8 law, also known as the Texas Heartbeat Act, within our community. This podcast will answer some of your questions and will show you that you are not alone, and all of us agree that there are things of this law that need to be changed. Why don't we start off by looking at some of the answers and responses given to us on our survey. Before we look at the answers and questions that were given on this survey, I would like to say that there are no right and wrong answers. This survey was made to see what everyone's opinions were and to have an idea of how our community feels about the abortion and the Texas law. Now that we know this, why don't we start looking at some of our questions? I asked the respondees, do you think it is a mother's choice to keep or abort her baby? Majority answered, her body, her choice. I also asked if they believed the new passage of the law violated women's constitutional right. Majority said yes. I asked if victims of an act of sexual violence should have an exempt from the law that prohibits women from getting abortion, and majority said that yes. I asked, do you think it should be required for a minor that had parental consent for an abortion? Majority answered yes and no. We had a tie. I asked, do you agree with the fact that anyone can be sued even if all they did was give you a right to the clinic? Majority of our respondees said no. As all you can see, most of the people who took our survey did not agree with this law and some of the things that are part of it. Now, why don't we take a look at some of the statistics of our survey. Majority of the people who took our survey were females, most of them were between the ages of 21 and 32. We did have a few viewpoints of older people and our younger generation. 30 of our respondents were religious. Majority did not identify in any political parties, and most of our respondents were Hispanics. We had little percentages of white people and black people. We only had 3 black people, 4 white, and 54 were Hispanic. In total, we had 63 responses on this survey. At the end of the day, whether our respondents were pro-life or pro-choice, whether they were male or female, or whether they were religious or not, they all had the same viewpoints and agreed with each other on a lot of the questions I asked. So as you can see, our community does not agree with this law and does believe that a few of the things need to be changed, and all of them can agree that certain parts of this law are needing some changes and improvement. So without even speaking to each other or anything, our respondents all had the same opinions and idea that the Heartbeat Act should be revised because some of these laws are not okay, and our whole community does not agree with these laws. Now that we've seen some of the viewpoints of our community, let's go ahead and look at the law aspect of this bill. To do so, I reached out to criminal at-law defense attorney Daniel Avalar. I will be reading to you some of my questions and the answers I received from Mr. Avalar. I started off by asking him, what does this new law do and how does it work? Mr. Avalar said, 1. If Roe v. Wade is overturned, the law applies. 2. It prohibits any and all abortions after 6 weeks, no exceptions. 3. It subjects people who assist in abortion to civil liability. They can be fined up to $10,000. I also asked what you could be charged with, and the answer was anywhere from a Class A misdemeanor to a state jail felony. The third question I had was, what legal advice do you suggest for any of those fighting for abortion rights? He answered, do not have an abortion after 6 weeks because you will violate Texas law. Let us move on to my next questions for Mr. Avalar. Who can and cannot be sued? For example, if a mother has health problems and needs the abortion, will the doctor be sued for performing the surgery? He said, no, the state carves out an exception if the abortion is necessary to save the life of the mother. I also asked, if a mother has cardiac issues or a miscarriage and has an abortion, can she be sued if this happened after the 6 weeks? He answered no. My last two questions I asked were, do you believe the new passage of the law violates women's rights? To which he answered no. And my last question was, what are your thoughts on this new law? He said the new law should carve out an exception for victims of sexual assault. They should also narrow down the applicability of those who assist. Other than that, the law is justified. This was some of the law aspect of this bill. I hope the information you received today helped you educate yourself a bit more on how the bill works. And I also hope that the advice that Mr. Daniel Avalar provided me with will help you when you are thinking of getting abortion or thinking of helping anyone who is planning on getting an abortion, or thinking of that as an option. Now, before I end this podcast, I would like to thank Mr. Daniel Avalar for taking the time out of his day to allow me to interview him, and for giving me a thorough aspect of how the law is portrayed and practiced with the SB 8 Act, also known as the Heartbeat Act. I would also like to thank those who participated in the survey, and to the listeners for taking time out of their day to join in on this very controversial topic. Once again, thank you for listening to My Heartbeat podcast. This is Melissa Velasquez.
Music bed.